Okay, so we talked about this idea of it being defined as a naturally occurring altered state of consciousness. So we then have the two types of sleep. So we've got our REM, so our rapid eye movement sleep, and our NREM, which is our non-rapid eye movement. So very much in the name. And again, this is what I was talking about when we're thinking about EOG. So we can distinguish if someone is in REM sleep or in NREM sleep based on how rapidly or what the EOG is showing. So in rapid eye movement sleep, so in REM sleep, that EOG, it's going to be going like crazy. The waves are going to be really fast and frequent. In your NREM sleep, the eyes aren't really moving, or they're moving a little bit more slowly. So that graph is just going to be, smaller waves are going to be less frequent. It's going to show that the muscles that control the eyes aren't moving as much as they are in REM sleep. Okay, so REM sleep, we spend a shorter amount of time. So it's about a quarter or a fifth. So less than NREM. Obviously, the hallmark factor of this is that idea of our rapid eye movement. So your eyes are obviously closed, but under it, your eyeballs are just sort of wiggling around. REM sleep is what we associate with dreaming. So with our NREM sleep, we can kind of think about certain stages of that as your deeper sleep. REM sleep isn't necessarily like light sleep, but it's just what we associate more with dreaming. And so dreaming and deep sleep, we don't really think of them sort of being in the same stages. So yeah, those are our kind of main characteristics of REM sleep. In terms of the actual time, so we have we'll talk about circadian rhythms and ultradian rhythms in a second. Over the course of the night, we'll have different episodes of REM sleep. So basically, let's say we sleep for 8 hours, over that time, you'll go into NREM sleep and then REM sleep, and then NREM sleep and then REM sleep. You just kind of cycle through the two types. Each time that you cycle through REM sleep, they get longer. So at the start of the night, NREM sleep and then REM sleep, that little portion of REM sleep may only be for a couple of minutes, really short. And then you go NREM sleep and then you go REM sleep, it'll be a bit longer. And then NREM and then REM and then NREM and then REM. By the last sort of period of REM sleep, so you're getting towards waking up, towards the morning, it'll be a lot longer. So that's the idea that as you sleep, as you go through your sleep episode, your REM cycle basically gets a little bit longer each time. The last one is here just as a little bit of an FYI. When we get to NREM again, we'll talk about brainwaves. So brainwaves are what would be picked up on an EEG. So we talked about, detecting electrical activity of the brain. It's not required for you to know the exact brainwave types. So I wouldn't, flag these and make sure you note these down. You will see it in a lot of textbooks. You might see it in some older past questions. But I think it's just something that you can have a read of, but not something that is super duper important. But ultimately, the way that an EEG can kind of figure out what stage you're in is based on how sort of fast your brain is moving or the electrical activity. So we have sort of this progression of sort of high activity brain waves and obviously down to lower. So as you go into deep sleep, obviously the brain is slowing down and you get those sort of slower waves. Whereas when you are awake, like so right now, you would expect in my brain, hopefully, the brain waves are moving a little bit faster. So these fast waves are called beta brain waves. So they're associated with, sort of higher brain activity. And that's what you kind of see in REM sleep. So it's this idea that the brain is pretty active. And then you go from beta to alpha to theta to delta. So delta is your slowest, and those are the ones that you see in your deep sleep. So again, this is just more of a sort of an FYI, but you commonly come across it. And for that reason, we call REM sleep paradoxical sleep. So it's a bit of a paradox because it's we see the brain or the body working a little bit faster or being a little bit more active. But in REM sleep, you're ultimately like paralyzed, like you don't really move. Compared to deep sleep, where you might like toss and turn. In REM sleep, you don't really move at all. So yeah, internal active, that idea of your heart rate might be going a little bit faster than NREM, the idea that your brain is kind of ticking a little bit faster, but externally you're sort of frozen. So it's that idea of a paradoxical sleep. Okay, if we compare that to NREM, so NREM obviously makes up the majority of our sleep, so it's about 3/4 to 4/5 for adults, being aware that sleep changes as you age. But yeah, so it's kind of about a 3/4, 1/4 sort of thing that goes on. So just remember that you are mostly in NREM. So we have 4 stages of NREM sleep. And so we go from stage 1 to stage 4, with stage 1 being the lightest and stage 4 being the deepest. So stage 1 is when we're just kind of almost transitioning into sleep. So it's a very light sleep. You can still be woken up. But yeah, that's kind of the first stage. And you don't spend that long in there. So stage 2, you kind of spend a decent amount of time in. So in the first cycle, you don't really need to know these specific minutes, but in the first sleep cycle, so that first portion of NREM of the night, you spend a decent time in stage 2, and then similar to REM, as the night goes on, you spend a little bit more time in stage 2. We have a nice graph coming up that'll hopefully make things a little bit more easier to comprehend. But yeah, stage 2 is kind of where you spend a decent amount of your NREM sleep. In terms of your brain waves for these two, again, you're kind of just going from those, like sort of those lighter ones. So those, remembering that beta are your fast ones, and then it's kind of alpha and theta. Again, we've popped them in grey because it's not a major thing to be aware of, but your teacher may discuss it. You may see it in your textbooks. If it's on your SACs, again, it just depends what school you go to, your teacher, things like that. But if you never hear about it in class, then don't really worry about it too much. But it's that idea that, as you would expect, when you go to sleep, your brain is just slowing down a little bit. Okay, so stage 3 and 4 are our deep sleep. So stage 4 is obviously the deepest, but when you use the term deep sleep, you're kind of collectively referring to stage 3 and stage 4. So this is when you're getting into your kind of real proper sleep, and this is when you get quite hard to wake. So your kind of body goes through all the things again. Everything is just basically slowing down. And you sort of get a bit of those delta waves coming in because you're going into deep sleep until you hit stage 4, where you are in your proper deep sleep, like sleeping like a log, that kind of thing. So kind of minimal movement, you've got a lot of these delta waves, and you're really hard to wake. So when you have to like shake someone to wake them up or scream really loud, they're probably not in stage 2. Stage 2, you're kind of a little bit easier to wake up. Whereas your stage 3 and your stage 4, if you have to shake someone to wake them up, they're probably in, one of these deeper stages of sleep, maybe even stage 4, because of that idea that they need a lot of sort of external stimuli to actually get them out of their sleep. Yeah, but that's these general stages. Okay, so this is a really nice diagram that kind of summarizes or sort of, explains those stages. And it shows you your cycle. So again, we'll define the ultradian rhythm in a second. But here you have the start of the night. So this is your hours. So again, you get about 8 hours of sleep. So the purple is your REM, and then all of these are your NREM. So the gray is your NREM, the purple is your REM. You can see that you obviously spend a lot more time in your NREM. So that's that 80%, let's say, and the purple is about 20%. And this is of an adult. So you ultimately enter sleep, you're in stage 1, stage 2, and you spend a decent amount in deep sleep towards the beginning of the night. As you can see, as you go on into the sort of, 8th hour and longer into the night, you get less deep sleep. So you can see by the time you're on your 3rd, 4th, and 5th sleep cycles, you're actually not getting into that stage 4. So your deep sleep is mainly towards the start of the night. And that's why when I was referring to this point here, when I said NREM stage 2 lengthens with each successive cycle, it's kind of complementary to that, because you're getting less deep sleep, you're ultimately going to get more sort of stage 2. And you can see that in here, we're spending a nice time in stage 2, and by cycle 4 and cycle 5, it's all really stage 2. You can also see quite nicely with the purple, you can see that in your first cycle, your first REM period is really short. Then cycle 2, gets a bit longer, gets a bit longer. By your last cycle, you can see that your final REM period is a lot longer. So as the night goes on, that REM period increases. And you can see that I remember this is something, my teacher told me, it always stuck in my head and helped me remember. Like it's sort of the last stage before waking. So if you wake up naturally, that's why sometimes you might be able to remember your dream as you wake up, or it might feel like, oh my gosh, I feel like I was just dreaming, because you probably were, because you usually, like naturally, you would wake up sort of exiting that REM period and exiting, maybe if you're dreaming during that time. Whereas if you use an alarm, you might be sort of woken up out of stage 4, and then you'll be a bit groggier and things like that. Yeah. Okay, so these are kind of the key points summarized. So we talked about how the length of the sleep cycles increase slightly. So you can see that with these, so cycle 1, cycle 2, cycle 3, that idea that they extend a little bit. Important things to remember are the next 2 dot points. So your deep sleep decreases, as we talked about with stage 3 and stage 4. As the night goes on, you get less and less of that. And then your REM sleep periods increase as the night goes on. So hopefully that makes sense, and that graph shows that pretty nicely. Okay, so in terms of our rhythm, so sleep is a biological rhythm, that idea of it being controlled by a biological clock and things like that. So generally it's about 24 hours, which makes sense because we sleep, usually once in a 24-hour period. And we